Elias had always lived a quiet life. The kind of life where days passed gently, without much change. He worked as a herder on the wide plains outside a small town, caring for sheep and living in a small wooden cabin that stood alone near a slow-moving creek. Most people in town knew him by sight, but they did not know much about him. He rarely spoke more than necessary, and when he did, his words came out calm and soft, like someone who had spent too many years listening to wind instead of people. His days were peaceful, but he felt something missing, though he never admitted it aloud. Once a month, he traveled into town to buy supplies, salt, cooking oil, rope, nails, wool shears when needed. The flea market was always busy on those days. Stalls lined the dusty street, filled with colorful cloth, jars of honey, second-hand books, and small carved goods made by traveling craftspeople. Elias usually walked through quickly, buying what he needed and leaving without delay. But on this particular cloudy afternoon, something unusual happened, something that made him stop in his tracks. He noticed a woman standing behind a small table decorated with handmade items, bracelets woven with feathers, carved wooden charms, painted stones, and little dream catchers made from twine and thin wooden rings. Every piece had a black crow feather tied to it. People around town called her the Crow Woman, though not in a harsh way. It was simply the name given to her because she always used crow feathers in her art. Her real name was Mara, though Elias did not know it yet. She had an unusual calmness in her face, a quiet strength that made her seem different from the lively, talkative sellers around her. Her dark hair was braided with small beads, and her clothes were simple but neat. She worked with care, arranging her items with gentle fingers, making sure each piece faced the right way. She didn't call out to customers or try to force anyone to buy. Instead, she simply stood there, letting people come to her naturally. Elias felt something stir inside him the moment he saw her. It was not loud or sudden. It was a slow, curious pull, like the quiet tug of a river current. He didn't understand it. And because he didn't understand it, he hesitated. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching her hands move, watching the feathers sway lightly in the breeze. She noticed him standing there, looking almost confused, and lifted her eyes toward him. Their eyes met. She didn't smile at first, nor did he. It was simply a moment of recognition, like two people noticing something familiar in each other without knowing why. Elias finally stepped forward, unsure of what he would say. He reached for a charm with a single crow feather tied to it. The feather felt soft between his fingers, and the wooden piece was carved with simple lines that looked like wings. Mara spoke first. Her voice was soft and warm, nothing sharp or heavy. "You can hold it," she said, as if sensing his careful nature. "It's meant to bring protection and calm." He nodded, still lost in thoughts he couldn't shape into words. After a long moment, something happened that neither of them expected. Elias opened his mouth to speak, but instead of asking the price or making a simple comment, the words that came out were completely different. His voice was serious, steady, but gentle, as always. "You will come with me." As soon as he said it, he felt a shock inside himself. Why did he say that? Where had that come from? Elias was not a man who made bold statements. He wasn't someone who told strangers what to do, nor someone who even invited people to visit his land. He lived alone for a reason. He didn't know how to speak to people, didn't know how to open up, didn't know how to express the emptiness he carried. And yet, those words had risen up naturally, as if they had been waiting for the right moment. Mara froze for a second, her eyes widening slightly, not in fear, but in surprise. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand what he meant. Elias felt his face warm with embarrassment. He wanted to take back the words, to explain that he didn't mean them the way they sounded, but he couldn't find the right explanation. She finally spoke again, but her voice was calm, not upset. "Why did you say that?" she asked quietly. Elias swallowed hard. He felt foolish standing there, struggling for words. He wasn't trying to order her or make her uncomfortable. He was simply a man who had seen something that felt important, something that stirred a part of his heart he had forgotten existed. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "The charm. It felt like it belonged on my land. And maybe you did too." Mara blinked. But she didn't step back or react harshly. She could sense sincerity in his tone. There was no force, no demand, only an awkward truth from a man who didn't know how to speak beautifully. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. His clothes were simple, dusty from work. His hands were rough, from tending sheep. But there was gentleness in his eyes, a tired gentleness that made her think he had spent too many years alone. She placed another charm into his hand, this one with 2 feathers instead of 1. "People don't usually say things like that to strangers," she said softly. "I know," Elias answered, feeling more awkward by the second. "I didn't mean to sound wrong." "You didn't," she replied, surprising him. "Just unexpected." Customers wandered past them, some glancing curiously, others lost in their own shopping. But in that moment, the noise of the market seemed far away. It felt like the world had narrowed to just the 2 of them. Mara sensed something different about him. He wasn't like the loud men who bargained or the travelers who tried to flirt. He wasn't someone looking for entertainment or attention. He was simply a man with a quiet heart who said something without thinking, something honest even if clumsy. She didn't laugh at him. She didn't mock him. She only observed him with thoughtful eyes, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. Elias finally forced himself to speak again, wanting to fix the strange moment he had created. "I would like to know you. Not take you away. Just know you." Her expression softened. It was clear he was not a man who played games or said empty things. He said what he felt, even if it came out too fast or too honest. Mara respected that, immediately. She nodded slowly. "I understand. Perhaps we can talk again." Elias felt something shift inside him. Something warm. Something hopeful. He nodded back, relieved. He bought the charm, paying more than she asked without knowing it. He placed it carefully in his pocket before turning to leave. As he walked away, he didn't realize Mara watched him for a long moment. A small, gentle smile forming on her face. She had met many people in her traveling life, but none who spoke with such unpolished honesty. She found herself curious about him in a way she couldn't explain. And though neither of them knew it yet, that simple, unexpected moment, those strange words spoken without planning, would become the beginning of something that would change both of their lives in ways they never imagined. Elias did not usually return to town so soon after a market day. He preferred the quiet of his land and the soft sounds of sheep grazing. But the week after meeting Mara, something kept pulling him back. He told himself he needed extra supplies, but he knew deep down that wasn't true. The real reason was simple: he wanted to see her again. The thought made him both nervous and strangely excited. When he walked into the market, he didn't know if she would be there. The morning air was cool, and small groups of sellers were still setting up their booths. He passed familiar stalls, nodding politely to people who recognized him. But his eyes kept searching for the feathers, the wooden carvings, the soft presence he remembered so clearly. For a moment, he worried she had already left town. Traveling sellers rarely stayed long. Then he saw her. Mara was arranging her items on the table again, her fingers brushing lightly over each piece. She looked peaceful, as if she belonged in both silence and noise at the same time. Elias slowed his steps, suddenly wondering if he should pretend he was just passing by. Would she think he came only for her? And was that such a bad thing? Before he could decide, Mara lifted her head and spotted him. A small smile appeared on her face. Soft, warm, and real. It calmed Elias instantly. "You came back," she said in her gentle voice. "I had things to buy," he replied, though both of them knew it wasn't the full truth. She didn't tease him, didn't push. She simply nodded and continued arranging her items, but her smile remained. Elias stepped closer, feeling less nervous than before. There weren't many customers yet, so the two of them had a quiet moment together. Elias looked over her handmade pieces. Every item had careful work in it, like time and patience woven into each thread and carving. He picked up a necklace with a black feather tied to a small stone. "You make all of these?" he asked. "Most of them," she said. "Some are made with my grandmother. She taught me everything I know." Elias found himself imagining Mara sitting beside an older woman, both working with calm hands, sharing stories while tying feathers and painting tiny designs. It made him feel something warm inside, something like admiration. "Your work is beautiful," he said. Her cheeks softened with a quiet blush. Not from embarrassment, but from being genuinely touched. "Thank you. My grandmother says, our hands carry our stories. Maybe that's why people like what we make." Elias nodded slowly. "I think that's true." For a while, they talked like that simple, steady conversation that felt natural. Elias wasn't used to talking much. Yet with Mara, he didn't struggle. Her calm energy seemed to make space for him to speak. She listened with interest, and he found himself telling her things he rarely said aloud about his sheep, his land, the peaceful mornings when the sun rose behind the hills. Mara listened, smiling softly. "You live far from town, don't you?" "Yes," he answered. "The land is quiet. It's good for the animals." "Crowd. Do you like being alone?" she asked, her voice curious rather than judging. Elias hesitated. He thought about the answer carefully. "I don't mind it. But sometimes it gets a little too quiet." And she looked at him as if she understood more than he said. "Quiet can feel heavy sometimes." He nodded. That was exactly how it felt. A heavy kind of silence, without laughter or shared moments. Mara told him about her life too. She lived a traveling life, moving with her grandmother from market to market, never staying in one town more than a few weeks. They earned their living from the crafts they sold. Some days were good, some days not so good, but they managed. She spoke with gratitude, never complaining. "Doesn't moving all the time get tiring?" Elias asked gently. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it is the only life we know, and my grandmother likes being around different people. She says every market has a different energy." Elias wondered how it felt to never have a stable home, to always pack and unpack, to sleep under different roofs every few days. Mara didn't seem unhappy, but he could sense something beneath her calm tone, a longing she didn't speak of. As they talked, more people arrived at the market, and Mara began selling her items. Elias stepped aside so customers could browse, but he stayed nearby, quietly helping when she struggled with tying a bag or reaching for something on a higher shelf. She thanked him each time, her eyes warm with appreciation. Mara noticed that he was not like the other customers. He never touched things carelessly. He always waited calmly. And when people stepped in front of him, or interrupted, he simply stayed quiet. She liked that about him, his patience, his steady presence. When the crowd thinned again, she turned to him. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. Elias looked at her with gentle honesty. "I'm glad too." Mara reached for a small box under the table and pulled out a charm he hadn't seen before. It had 2 feathers and a small polished stone painted with a soft swirl. She held it out to him. "This one is for you," she said. "Not as a customer gift, but as a thank you for visiting again." Elias looked at it with surprise. "Are you sure?" "Yes. she said with a small smile. It feels right to give it to you. He accepted it, touched by the gesture. He didn't know how to express what he felt, but Mara seemed to understand anyway. As the day went on, they continued talking in small moments between customers. Mara told him about the different markets she had visited, the music she heard in one town, the river festival in another, the friendly shopkeeper in yet another place. Elias listened carefully, his mind painting pictures of all the places she described. He realized something important about her. Mara had seen a world much larger than his quiet plains, yet she didn't act like someone above anyone else. She spoke with kindness, with humility, and with a gentle respect for every person she met. Elias found this deeply admirable. Later, as the sun started lowering behind the rooftops, Mara began packing her items into wooden boxes. Elias helped her close the lids and tie the cloth covers. She didn't have to ask. He simply stepped forward, offering silent assistance. She appreciated that, more than words could express. When everything was packed, the two of them stood beside her stall, the soft golden light of sunset touching everything around them. Mara looked at him with a thoughtful expression. I won't be here next week, she said quietly. Another market is waiting, in a different town. Elias felt a heavy pause settle inside him. He had known traveling sellers left quickly, but hearing it directly from her made his chest tighten. He didn't want her to go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he couldn't say that. He didn't want to burden her or sound selfish. Instead, he asked, "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," she replied. He looked down, trying to gather his thoughts. His fingers touched the charm she gave him, feeling the soft feathers. Finally, he looked at her again. "I'm glad I met you," he said sincerely. Mara's eyes softened even more. "I'm glad I met you too." She hesitated for a moment as if deciding something, then added, "When I move, it doesn't mean I forget people. Some people stay in my memory." Elias felt a small spark of hope at her words. He nodded slowly, wanting to say more, but struggling to find the right way. She noticed his attempt and took a gentle step closer. "Maybe our paths will cross again," she said softly. "Sometimes life brings people together more than once." He held her gaze, feeling something warm settle inside him. The sky grew darker, and the evening breeze grew cooler. Mara gathered her boxes, preparing to leave. Elias carried two of them for her until they reached the quiet street behind the market. Her small wagon waited there. Before she climbed onto it, she looked at him one more time. "Thank you for today." "Thank you," he replied, his voice sincere and calm. As she rode away slowly, the soft sound of the wooden wheels echoing lightly, Elias watched until she disappeared around the corner. He stood there for a long time, holding the charm she gave him, feeling its feathers brush softly against his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt one thing clearly. Something inside him had changed. A quiet part of his heart, that had been empty for years, now felt alive again. For the first time in a long time, he hoped for something more. When Mara left town, Elias tried to convince himself life would return to normal. He told himself he would focus on the sheep, mend the fences, repair the old shed door, and keep his mind busy. But the truth became clear. Within a single day, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Her calm smile, her careful hands arranging feathers, the soft way she spoke. Everything about her stayed in his memory like a picture he could not stop looking at. The charm she had given him now hung inside his cabin, right above the window where the evening sun touched it every day. The feathers moved gently whenever the breeze slipped through the cracks in the wood. Each time it swayed, it reminded him of her presence, her kindness, and the way she had looked at him before leaving. He found himself looking toward the dusty road more often than before. Every time the wind shifted or a cart passed by in the distance, his heart jumped a little, hoping it was her. But days passed. And then a week, and nothing changed. The road remained empty, and the plains stayed silent. Still, something inside him refused to settle. It wasn't a restless feeling, but rather a quiet understanding that something unfinished existed between them. One afternoon, while he was repairing a wooden fence post, he heard the soft beating of wings overhead. A crow landed on the fence, its dark eyes watching him closely. It tilted its head, let out a low, musical caw, and then pecked at a shiny pebble on the wood. Elias watched it curiously. He remembered Mara's words, that crows were guides in her family's beliefs, messengers that led people where they needed to go. The crow stayed for a long minute, then took flight, circling above him before heading toward the road leading into town. Elias watched it until it became a distant speck in the sky. He didn't know if it meant anything, but the moment made him pause. Something inside him whispered that he shouldn't simply wait and hope. If he wanted to see her again, perhaps he needed to take a step on his own. The next morning, he prepared his horse and traveled toward the nearby town where the next market was usually held. It wasn't a short ride, but he didn't mind. He followed the dirt road through rolling fields, past a creek full of sparkling water, and through a grove of tall trees. The journey was long and quiet, giving him plenty of time to think. When he reached the town, the market was already bustling. Vendors shouted out their prices. Children ran around chasing each other, and the air smelled of fresh bread and roasted corn. Elias felt out of place at first. He wasn't used to large crowds or busy voices, but he moved through slowly, searching each row, hoping to find a familiar table decorated with feathers. He walked past stalls selling pottery, woven baskets, leather goods, and colorful fabrics. He nodded politely when sellers called out to him, but he didn't stop. His eyes scanned for feathers, black feathers that moved like tiny wings in the wind. Then he saw them. At the far edge of the market, under the shade of a wide oak tree, he saw a table covered with handmade items, wood carvings, feather jewelry, painted stones, and behind it stood Mara. He stopped walking. She looked the same, and yet somehow different. She wore a long, simple dress, with small embroidered patterns near the hem. Her hair was braided with 2 small beads, and she was arranging her items with that same careful touch he remembered. When she lifted her head and noticed him standing there, her eyes widened slightly in surprise, and then a warm smile blossomed across her face, one that made the long journey worth every step. "Elias," she said softly, almost like a breath. "You came." He walked toward her, feeling the weight in his chest ease with every step. She looked at him with a mixture of happiness and curiosity. "I didn't expect you to come all this way." I wanted to see you again," he said in his calm, steady voice. Though inside, he felt nervous. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here." Her smile grew gentle. "I'm glad you did." She motioned for him to stand beside her table. The customers browsing her work stepped aside politely, sensing something meaningful in their quiet reunion. Mara handed him a carved wooden piece shaped like a crescent moon. "My grandmother made this one," she said. "She says it's for people who follow their hearts, even when they don't know the ending." Elias held the carving with care. "Does your grandmother know I came?" Tuman Randas." Mara laughed softly. "She guessed someone might come looking for me. She notices everything." A small voice came from behind the stall. "Everything except my cane," an older woman said with a cheerful chuckle. Elias turned to see Mara's grandmother, sitting on a small wooden stool. She had warm eyes, silver-streaked hair, braided neatly, and a smile that could brighten any cloudy day. She looked at Elias with curiosity before giving him a welcoming nod. "So this is the quiet herder?" she asked with humor. "The one who speaks little, but feels deeply?" Elias flushed slightly, but Mara smiled proudly, as if she liked that description of him. He bowed his head respectfully. "It's good to meet you." Her grandmother chuckled again. Mara quickly shook her head, giving her grandmother a gentle warning look. But the older woman simply winked. Elias felt a small, warm laughter rise in his chest, something he hadn't felt with another family in years. The three of them talked for a while. Mara's grandmother asked him about his land, his cabin, the sheep, and whether he cooked his meals regularly or lived on bread and dried meat like a careless bachelor. Elias answered each question honestly, which seemed to amuse her greatly. Later, when the market quieted, Mara invited Elias to walk with her behind the stalls where the noise was softer. They walked slowly, side by side, passing rows of trees and small patches of grass. The breeze carried the scent of pine and distant cooking fires. Elias glanced at her gently. "Your grandmother seems kind." "She is," Mara replied with affection. "She raised me. She taught me everything I know about crafts, traveling, and understanding people." "You move around a lot," Elias said softly. "Does it ever feel lonely?" Mara paused before answering. "Sometimes, but I'm used to it. I've traveled since I was a child. Still, there are days I wish for a place to stay longer than a few weeks." Elias listened carefully, sensing the weight behind her words. She looked around the market. The people, the noise, the constant movement. Then she looked back at him, her expression softer. "Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to have a home," she said quietly. "A real home. Not just a tent or a temporary room." Elias felt something stir deeply inside him. He wanted to speak, to offer something, but he didn't know if he had the right yet. They reached a wooden bench beneath a large tree and sat down. The leaves above them rustled softly, creating a gentle sound that matched their quiet conversation. Mara looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she said, "When you said those strange words to me at the flea market, I didn't understand them then. But I think I understand them more now." Elias felt his heart beat slower, heavier. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I think you meant that I didn't feel like a stranger to you. And maybe you didn't feel like a stranger to me either." He nodded slowly, grateful she understood something he had never been able to explain properly. Mara continued softly, "I've met many people, but your presence felt peaceful, like a place my heart recognized even before my mind did." Elias looked at her with quiet sincerity. "I felt the same." They sat there for a while, letting the truth settle between them like warm sunlight. Finally, Mara took a deep breath. "Elias, would you like to meet my grandmother properly? She would like to talk to you." He nodded. "I'd like that." As they walked back toward the market stalls, Elias felt a gentle change inside him. He realized he wasn't just visiting another market. He was taking a step toward something that felt important, something he could not yet name, but something that felt right. And Mara, walking quietly beside him, seemed to feel the same. This meeting was not just a coincidence. It was a beginning, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them were slowly, quietly welcoming. Elias returned home after visiting Mara and her grandmother, but the feeling inside him was no longer the silent emptiness he had lived with for years. Instead, his heart felt warm and awake, like a fire that had been waiting quietly for someone to light it. For days afterward, he kept remembering the way Mara had looked at him under the shade of the tree, how her grandmother's laughter had softened the air, and how the charm in his cabin now felt less like a decoration and more like a promise. Every morning, he found himself waking up earlier, stepping outside just to look toward the road. The shepherds in town would have laughed kindly if they saw him, Elias, the quiet herder who never watched the road for anyone, but he didn't mind. Something inside him hoped Mara would return to his land one day, even though he knew she was a traveling seller and might move far away again. 1 week passed. Then 2. Life on the plains continued with its usual rhythm. The sheep grazed peacefully, the wind slid over the grass, and the creek murmured softly behind his cabin. But Elias moved through his days differently now. Small things reminded him of her. A feather on the grass made him think of her crafts. The scent of pine carried him back to the bench where they had talked. Even the patterns of clouds in the sky made him wonder what town she was in now. But something unusual happened on a calm afternoon. Elias was preparing to mend a section of fencing when he heard the distant rattling of wagon wheels. He looked up sharply. Far down the road, a small shape moved slowly toward him, bouncing gently with each turn of the wheels. His heart tightened, not painfully, but with a hopeful ache. He wiped his hands on his trousers and watched carefully. As the wagon drew closer, he saw a familiar shape, a woman sitting on the front seat, holding the reins gently. Her long braids shifted with the breeze. Behind her, in the wagon's shaded corner, an older woman sat comfortably, looking around with bright eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Elias's breath caught. It was them, Mara and her grandmother. He stepped forward, almost forgetting how to breathe for a moment. Mara lifted her head and saw him standing there. A smile spread across her face, soft and warm, the kind of smile that held understanding, memory, and an unspoken message. We came back. When the wagon reached him, Mara slowed the horse and brought it to a gentle stop. She looked at him with eyes full of calm certainty. "We are here," she said. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He simply stood there, taking in the sight of her, making sure this wasn't a dream created by loneliness. Her grandmother laughed softly. "You look like a man who forgot how to speak," she teased kindly. Elias finally found his voice. "I didn't expect you." Mara stepped down from the wagon. Her boots touched the dusty ground lightly. "We traveled to 2 more towns," she said, but neither felt right. "My grandmother grew tired. And then, we talked." She paused, her eyes searching his. "We missed the quiet. We missed the peaceful days near this region. And we missed someone who made us feel safe." Her words settled into Elias like a warm breeze. Her grandmother nodded from the wagon. "I'm getting old," she said cheerfully. "I don't want to move around anymore. I want a place where my bones don't complain every 2 days." Mara smiled at her grandmother's humor, then looked back at Elias. She spoke softly but with confidence. "You once said your land has room for more than just sheep. Is that still true?" Elias nodded slowly. "Yes, it's always true." Mara took a slow breath, as if preparing herself for a choice she had already made deep in her heart. "Then, if you mean it, we would like to stay. Not forever if it doesn't feel right. But long enough to rest. Long enough to see what life here could be like." Elias felt something shift inside him, a soft but powerful sense of belonging, like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "Both of you. There's space, and you're welcome." Mara's smile deepened, not as a sudden burst of joy, but as a quiet acceptance. He could see relief in her eyes, as if she had been carrying a heavy worry, and finally set it down. He helped them unload the wagon slowly. Mara carried baskets filled with feathers, strings, wooden beads, and small carving tools. Her grandmother held a small blanket and a bag of herbs for tea. Elias guided them into the cabin. Mara looked around with interest, noting the charm she had given him hanging near the window. Her eyes softened when she saw it. "You kept it there?" she asked. "It reminded me of you." He answered honestly. Her grandmother laughed from her seat. "That charm did more than remind. It pulled us back here like a rope." They spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. Elias showed them the extra room he had always kept empty. The grandmother loved it immediately, saying it felt cozy and quiet. Mara walked around the cabin, admiring the wooden shelves, the small kitchen, and the simple handmade chairs. She seemed to appreciate every small detail, touching nothing but seeing everything. Later, they stepped outside together. The sunlight painted the plains golden. Mara stood with Elias on the small hill behind the cabin. The wind lifted her long braid gently. "It's so peaceful here," she whispered. Elias nodded. "This land has been quiet for a long time. It feels different now." Mara turned her head slightly to look at him. "Different good or different strange?" "Different. Good," he said softly. She smiled. Her grandmother called from the porch. "You two look like statues. Come help me make tea before the sun goes down." They both laughed something light and warm and walked back to the cabin together. Inside, the three of them shared tea made with herbs Mara's grandmother always carried. The warm, earthy smell filled the room. They talked about simple things: weather, markets, how sheep behave during winter storms. The conversation flowed without effort. Elias listened more than he spoke, but Mara and her grandmother didn't mind. They seemed to enjoy his quiet presence. After tea, Mara stepped outside for a moment. Elias followed, sensing she wanted to say something in private. The evening wind brushed gently across the plains. The sky turned shades of pink, gold, and soft blue. Mara stood there, looking at the horizon, her expression calm but thoughtful. She spoke softly, almost like she was talking to the open sky. "Elias, when I left the first town, I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew that living on the road forever didn't feel right anymore." He watched her quietly, waiting. She continued, "In every town we visited after meeting you, something felt missing. I realized it wasn't the market, or the people, or the place. It was a feeling." She turned to face him fully. A feeling of peace, a feeling of home. Elias felt his heart pause for a moment. Mara looked into his eyes. "When we were with you," my grandmother smiled more. "I felt safer, and the world felt less heavy. That is why we came." He breathed slowly, deeply, letting her words settle inside him. She added gently, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how long we will stay. But today, this feels right." Elias nodded, his voice soft but sure. "It feels right to me too." They stood there quietly for a moment, watching the last light fade behind the hills. Then, they walked back toward the cabin, side by side, without speaking. They didn't need words. The silence between them felt full, not empty. By the time night settled over the plains, the cabin no longer felt like a lonely shelter. It felt alive, with laughter, soft voices, and the gentle warmth of company. Elias realized that he wasn't just hosting guests. He was welcoming something he had never had before: connection, companionship, and the beginning of a new chapter. And Mara, settling into the room with her grandmother, felt something she had been chasing for years finally rest inside her heart. The lonely herder was lonely no more. The Crow woman had found a place to stay. And together, they entered a quiet, peaceful beginning. One shaped, not by chance, but by choice.